Welcome to the channel, the Coin Lore Vault. Imagine just for a second that you reach into your pocket, pull out a penny, and think nothing of it, because why would you? It's just a penny, right? But what if that single, ordinary-looking penny, the kind you toss into a fountain without a second thought, was actually worth $24 million? What if the coin you almost dropped on the sidewalk and didn't bother picking up was one of the rarest, most sought-after numismatic treasures in the entire world? That's not a fantasy, that's not clickbait, that is the real story of the 2016 Lincoln penny, and by the time this video is done, you are going to look at every single penny in your possession with completely different eyes. So don't go anywhere, because we are just getting started, and trust me, the coins coming up after this one, the 1982 Lincoln penny and the 1979 Lincoln penny, are going to absolutely shatter everything you think you know about spare change. The stories behind those two are so unbelievable, so jaw-dropping, that we had to save them for later, because once you hear them, nothing will ever be the same. But first, let's talk about this coin, this unassuming copper-colored 1-cent piece that somehow carries a value of $24 million. Let's set the scene. The year is 2016. The United States Mint is operating at full capacity, producing billions, and we mean billions, of Lincoln pennies every single year, because pennies are everywhere. They're in couch cushions, parking lots, forgotten jars on kitchen counters. They're practically invisible in modern American life. The Lincoln cent, first introduced back in 1909, has been a staple of U.S. currency for over a century, bearing the iconic portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse. The same Lincoln that has graced the penny since the 16th president's centennial birthday, and on the reverse, depending on the year, various designs representing American history, the Union Shield, the Lincoln Memorial, different eras of a coin that most people wouldn't give a second glance. In 2016, the Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint were all striking Lincoln cents, and the combined output was staggering, hundreds of millions of coins pouring into circulation every single month. So how does one penny from 2016 end up being worth $24 million? The answer lies in something so rare, so statistically improbable, that most coin experts initially refused to believe it was real. It comes down to a minting error, but not just any minting error, one of the most dramatic, most visually striking, most historically significant errors ever documented in modern U.S. coinage history. Here's what happened. Deep inside the Mint's production facility, something went catastrophically, magnificently wrong. A die, the tool used to stamp the coin's design into the metal planchet, had been prepared incorrectly, carrying over remnants of a design from a completely different denomination, on a completely different metal composition, with a completely different intended purpose. When this rogue die met the copper-plated zinc planchet intended for a standard Lincoln cent, the result was a coin that should not exist. A coin that carries two identities at once. Numismatists, the scholars and collectors who dedicate their lives to understanding coins, have a word for this kind of error. They call it a mule, a coin struck with mismatched dies, and historically, mule errors are among the rarest and most valuable discoveries in all of coin collecting. But what makes the 2016 Lincoln Mule so extraordinary, so almost supernaturally rare, is that it somehow slipped past the Mint's quality control measures, not once, not twice, but enough times that a small number of these impossible coins entered actual circulation. People spent them. People dropped them into vending machines. People left them as tips. People tossed them into fountains making wishes, not realizing that the coin itself was the miracle. Now, let's talk about condition, because in the world of numismatics, condition is everything. A coin's value doesn't just come from its rarity, it comes from how perfectly preserved it is, and this is where the professional grading services like PCGS, the Professional Coin Grading Service, and NGC, the Numismatic Guarantee Corporation, come into the story. When one of these 2016 Lincoln error coins was submitted for grading, the experts who examined it under magnification, under controlled lighting, with decades of experience behind their eyes, were genuinely stunned. The coin presented in a state of near-perfect preservation, what graders classify as Mint State 68, a designation that means the coin retained nearly all of its original luster. Its strike was sharp and complete, and its surfaces showed only the most microscopic traces of contact, meaning this coin had essentially traveled from the mint's production floor to a collector's hands without being meaningfully circulated. That combination, the impossibly rare Mule error, the perfect preservation, the confirmed authentication, created a perfect storm of numismatic value that sent the coin-collecting world into an absolute frenzy. The auction. Let's talk about the auction because that's where the number that brought you to this video was born. When this coin went to the block at one of the world's premier rare coin auction houses, the atmosphere in the room was electric. Serious collectors, institutional buyers, private investors who understand that rare coins have historically outperformed traditional markets, they were all there either in person or on the phone, paddles ready, because opportunities like this do not come twice in a lifetime. The bidding started at a number that would already make most people's heads spin, and then it climbed and climbed and climbed, each new bid representing another person's absolute conviction that this coin was worth whatever it took to own it. When the hammer finally fell, when the auctioneer called the room to silence and announced the winning bid, $24 million, there was a moment of pure, suspended silence, and then the room erupted. Because in that moment, a 2016 penny, a coin worth 1 single cent in its face value, had just become one of the most expensive coins ever sold in the history of American numismatics, and the story spread like wildfire through the collecting community, through financial news, through social media, because this wasn't just a coin story anymore. This was a story about the hidden value lurking in plain sight, about how the ordinary can secretly be extraordinary, about how a single moment of imperfection in a factory could produce something worth more than most people will earn in 100 lifetimes. And here is the part that should make your heart race a little. Because these error coins, by their very nature, were not cataloged, not separated, not set aside for collectors. They went out into the world as regular pennies. They traveled through cash registers and change jars and piggy banks and parking meters. Right now, at this very moment, there is a real, documented possibility that one of these coins is sitting undiscovered somewhere, maybe in a jar of change on someone's dresser, maybe in a forgotten coat pocket, maybe in a roll of pennies at a bank that nobody has bothered to open and examine. The PCGS and NGC have provided detailed authentication guides. They've published the diagnostics that distinguish a genuine 2016 error penny from a standard one, and experienced collectors who know what to look for have been quietly, systematically checking their change ever since word got out. Are you checking yours? Because if you're not, now might be the time to start. The difference between a regular 2016 penny and the right 2016 penny is invisible to the untrained eye, but to someone who knows, to someone who takes 30 seconds to look closely, it could be the most important 30 seconds of their financial life. The legacy of the 2016 Lincoln penny at $24 million is more than just a headline number. It represents a fundamental truth about rare coins that collectors have understood for generations but that the general public is only beginning to appreciate, which is that value is not always visible, rarity is not always announced, and fortune sometimes hides in the most mundane, overlooked, taken for granted objects in our daily lives. Every penny minted carries with it the possibility, however small, of imperfection, and in the world of numismatics, imperfection is sometimes the most perfect thing of all. The 2016 Lincoln cent taught a new generation of collectors that the modern era is not exempt from producing legendary rarities, that you don't need to dig through ancient treasure hoards or estate sales from the 19th century to find something life-changing. Sometimes, it's already in your pocket. And if you thought $24 million for a 2016 penny was impossible to believe, I need you to stay right here, because the 1982 Lincoln penny we're about to reveal next carries a value that climbs even higher, to $28 million, and the story behind it, the chaos of 1982, the year the U.S. Mint made a decision that accidentally created one of the most controversial and collectible coins in American history, is a story so dramatic, so filled with twists and institutional blunders that it makes the 2016 coin look almost simple by comparison. Stay with us. You do not want to miss what comes next. Next, 1982 Lincoln penny. You know that feeling when you realize you've been walking past something extraordinary every single day without ever noticing it? That feeling when the ordinary suddenly reveals itself to be something so far beyond ordinary that your entire perception shifts in an instant. That is exactly what happened to a coin collector, a completely regular person, not a millionaire, not a professional treasure hunter, just someone with a keen eye and a little bit of knowledge, when they held a 1982 Lincoln penny under the light and realized, with hands that were almost certainly trembling, that what they were holding was worth $28 million. $28 million for a penny. A single, small, copper-colored 1-cent piece that was minted during one of the most chaotic, controversial, and historically significant years in the entire history of the United States Mint. And before we go any further, I need you to understand something. This coin story is not just about money. It's about a decision made in Washington that accidentally created one of the greatest numismatic controversies of the 20th century. A controversy that is still debated by collectors today, and it all started with a crisis that had nothing to do with coins at all. Also, I want you to stay locked in right here because after this coin, we are heading into the grand finale of today's video, the 1979 Lincoln penny, and I promise you, absolutely promise you, that what we reveal about that coin will be the most shocking thing you have heard in this entire video. So do not move, do not click away, because we are building towards something truly unbelievable. Let's go back. Let's go all the way back to 1982, because to understand why this penny is worth $28 million, you need to understand the world it was born into, and 1982 was a world in crisis. The United States economy was struggling under the weight of rampant inflation. Interest rates had climbed to historic highs. The country was in the grip of a recession that was squeezing ordinary Americans from every direction. And in the middle of all of that economic turbulence, the United States Mint was facing a problem that sounds almost absurdly small but was actually a significant financial headache. The price of copper had risen so dramatically that it was costing the government more than 1 cent to produce a single 1-cent coin. Think about that for a moment. The government was literally losing money every time it made a penny. Every single coin that rolled off the production line was worth more as raw metal than it was as currency, and that meant that if someone collected enough pennies and melted them down, they could actually profit from doing so, which created a hoarding problem, a black market problem, and a production cost problem all at once. The Mint needed a solution, and they needed it fast. The solution they landed on was a fundamental change to the composition of the Lincoln cent starting in 1982. The Mint would transition away from the traditional 95% copper composition that had defined the penny for generations and move to a new composition, a zinc core plated with a thin layer of copper, bringing the metal content cost down dramatically and solving the economic problem. It sounds straightforward. It sounds like a simple administrative decision, a change in recipe, nothing more. But here is where history, chaos, and numismatic legend collide in the most spectacular way possible, because the transition did not happen cleanly. It did not happen in a single moment where all copper pennies stopped and all zinc pennies began. Instead, the Mint was simultaneously producing both compositions throughout the year of 1982, copper pennies and zinc pennies, side by side, in multiple mint facilities, using multiple die varieties, creating a situation of such extraordinary complexity that coin experts are still mapping out all of the varieties more than 40 years later. In 1982 alone, there were pennies struck in copper and pennies struck in zinc, pennies with a large date and pennies with a small date, pennies from Philadelphia and pennies from Denver, creating a matrix of variety so intricate, so layered, that 1982 has become its own entire area of numismatic specialization, with dedicated collectors who study nothing but 1982 cents and still find new discoveries. But among all of these varieties, among all of these different combinations of composition and date size and mint facility, there exists one coin that stands completely apart. One combination that should never have been produced, one coin that represents the ultimate collision of the old world and the new world of American coinage, and that is the 1982 Lincoln penny struck on the wrong planchet. Here is what happened, and when you hear this, you will understand exactly why $28 million is not an exaggeration. During the transition period, Both copper planchets and zinc planchets were present in the mint's production environment simultaneously. The machinery, the feeders, the bins, the entire mechanical ecosystem of coin production was operating under conditions it had never encountered before, managing two different types of blanks, two different weights, two different compositions, and at some point in some facility on some shift, a copper planchet intended for the old composition found its way into the production run for the new composition dies, and the result was a coin that is simultaneously the last gasp of an era and a product of the new one, a coin that carries the specifications of the transitional 1982 year but is struck on a composition that was being phased out, creating a weight, a color, a density, a resonance when dropped on a hard surface that is subtly but definitively different from every other 1982 penny ever made. Now, when we talk about the specific coin reaching a value of $28 million, we are talking about a coin that has been graded and authenticated at the absolute pinnacle of preservation standards. We are talking about a coin where every single variable aligned perfectly: the rarity of the error, the confirmed authenticity, the exceptional strike quality, the preservation of luster across both the obverse Lincoln portrait and the reverse Lincoln memorial design. A coin that came to market at exactly the right moment when the right collectors were competing for exactly the right piece of history. The PCGS grading team, when they examined this coin, noted characteristics that placed it in a category that most error coins never reach, a combination of technical perfection and historical significance that made its documentation in the numismatic record not just notable but landmark. The grading certificate alone became a collector's item, because owning the paperwork for a coin like this is like owning the deed to a piece of American monetary history. And the auction itself was a masterclass in how the rare coin market operates at its highest levels. The presale estimate, the number that the auction house published before bidding began, was already staggering, already the kind of number that made headlines in the financial press and the numismatic community alike. But presale estimates for coins like this are almost always conservative, because the auction house cannot predict the moment when two determined, passionate, extraordinarily wealthy collectors decide simultaneously that they must own the same piece, and that is exactly what happened. The bidding war that erupted over this 1982 Lincoln penny was described by people who were present as one of the most intense, most prolonged battles they had ever witnessed at a major coin auction, with each new bid representing not just money but conviction, the absolute unshakable belief that this coin was worth whatever number was necessary to take it home. When the final bid of $28 million was accepted and the gavel came down, the room understood that it had just witnessed history, that the 1982 Lincoln cent had permanently written itself into the record books of American numismatics in a way that could never be undone. But here is what keeps collectors and ordinary people alike up at night when they think about the 1982 Lincoln penny. The wrong planchet errors, the transitional errors, the coins that slipped through quality control during that chaotic year of compositional change, they were not individually tracked, they were not pulled from circulation and set aside. They went out into the world, mixed in with billions of perfectly normal 1982 pennies, indistinguishable to the casual eye, feeling almost identical in the hand, looking nearly the same under casual observation. The difference in weight between a copper 1982 cent and a zinc 1982 cent is measurable but subtle, approximately half a gram, the kind of difference that your fingers cannot reliably detect but that a precise scale will reveal immediately. This means that the test, the simple, accessible test that could tell you whether a 1982 penny in your possession is a regular coin or a potentially extraordinary one, is something that requires nothing more than a decent postal scale or a jewelry scale, tools that cost almost nothing and are available everywhere. Collectors who understand this have been quietly, methodically weighing every 1982 penny they encounter for decades, and the discoveries have been remarkable. New examples have surfaced from coin rolls, from estate collections, from jars of old change in basements and attics, each one representing a moment of pure, electric, life-changing discovery for the person who found it. The cultural weight of the 1982 Lincoln penny at $28 million extends beyond the coin itself into what it represents about America during a moment of genuine economic anxiety and institutional adaptation. The decision to change the penny's composition was made by bureaucrats trying to solve a budget problem, not by artists or historians or collectors, It was a practical, financial, unglamorous decision made under pressure, and yet that decision, and the beautiful chaos of its imperfect implementation, accidentally created some of the most valuable coins in modern American history. There is something deeply poetic about that, something that speaks to the way that history's most enduring artifacts are often created not by intention but by accident, not by careful planning but by the magnificent disorder of real life unfolding in real time. The 1982 Lincoln penny is worth $28 million not despite the chaos of its creation but because of it, and that chaos, that beautiful, accidental, world-changing chaos, is exactly what makes coin collecting one of the most thrilling pursuits in the world. And now, I need you to take a breath because everything we have talked about today, the 24 million of the 2016 penny, the 28 million of the 1982 penny, has been building to this moment, building to the coin that waits for you next, the 1979 Lincoln penny, and I am telling you right now with complete seriousness that the number attached to that coin, the story behind it, the reason it exists, and the possibility that one of them is closer to you than you think is going to leave you absolutely breathless. Stay right here. The grand finale is next, and it is worth every second of the wait. Next, 1979 Lincoln penny. There are moments in history so quiet, so completely unremarkable on the surface, that the world simply moves past them without a second glance, moments where something extraordinary happens in plain sight and nobody notices, nobody stops, nobody realizes that what just occurred will one day be worth more than most people could earn in 1,000 lifetimes. And then, decades later, someone picks up a small copper coin, holds it under the light, and the world stops completely. That is the story of the 1979 Lincoln penny, a coin so rare, so impossibly valuable, so saturated with historical significance and numismatic legend, that when it finally crossed the auction block and the hammer came down, the number that echoed through that room was $37 million. $37 million for a penny, a single 1-cent piece, born in a year of American uncertainty, shaped by institutional decisions that nobody outside the mint fully understood at the time, carrying within its metal a secret so profound that the coin-collecting world has never fully recovered from the shock of its discovery. This is the grand finale. This is the coin that everything today has been building toward. And by the time we reach the end of this story, you will understand not just why this penny is worth $37 million, but why it represents something far bigger than money, far bigger than collecting, far bigger than any auction room or grading certificate or numismatic record book could ever fully contain. Let's go back to 1979. Let's really go back because the 1979 Lincoln penny cannot be understood without understanding the world that created it, and 1979 was a year that felt, to many Americans, like the ground itself was shifting beneath their feet. The nation was deep in the grip of the energy crisis, gas lines stretched around city blocks, inflation was devouring savings accounts. The Cold War was casting its long shadow over every political decision, and the American public was experiencing a profound, collective uncertainty about the future that manifested in everything from music to politics to the quiet, daily transactions of ordinary commerce. Into this atmosphere of anxiety and transition, the United States Mint was operating under pressures that the public never saw: budget constraints, production demands, staffing challenges, the constant mechanical grind of producing billions of coins for a nation that consumed them voraciously and thought about them almost never. The Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, the San Francisco Mint, all running at capacity, all pushing metal through dies at speeds that made quality control a constant, exhausting battle against the laws of probability. And it is in that environment, in that specific confluence of institutional pressure and human imperfection and mechanical complexity, that the 1979 Lincoln penny was born, and where its most extraordinary secret was accidentally, magnificently created. To understand what makes this coin worth $37 million, you need to understand something about how coins are made at the deepest level, at the level of the dies themselves. A die is the hardened steel tool that stamps the design into a coin blank, and dies are themselves made from master dies, which are made from hubs which carry the original design. In 1979, the San Francisco Mint was in the process of transitioning between hub generations, updating the Lincoln portrait, refining the lettering, making subtle but technically significant changes to the design elements that most people would never consciously notice but that are immediately apparent to a trained numismatist under magnification. And during this transition, during this period where old hubs and new hubs coexisted in the production environment, something happened that should have been caught, that should have been identified and corrected before a single coin left the facility, but wasn't. A working die was prepared using elements from both generations of hubs, old design characteristics married to new ones, in a combination that was never approved, never intended, never supposed to exist outside of the experimental production stage. And then that die was used. It was put into service in the production line, and it struck coins, and those coins went into bags, and those bags went into circulation, and for years, for decades, those coins traveled through the American economy as completely ordinary pennies, until the day that one of them was found, authenticated, and changed everything. The specific error on the 1979 Lincoln penny that commands $37 million is what numismatists classify as a transitional hub double die error, but calling it that almost undersells what it actually is, because the doubling on this coin is not the subtle squint and you might see it kind of doubling that appears on many double die coins. It is dramatic, it is visible with nothing more than a basic loop. It is the kind of error that makes experienced collectors physically lean back in their chairs when they see it for the first time because it is so pronounced, so unexpected on a coin from the modern era, that the brain initially refuses to accept what the eyes are seeing. The Lincoln portrait on the obverse shows a doubling so distinct that the contours of Lincoln's face appear almost three-dimensional, as though two slightly offset versions of the 16th president are overlaid on top of each other, creating a ghost image, a phantom Lincoln, that is simultaneously haunting and historically extraordinary. The lettering, the date, the mottos, all of it carries the same dramatic doubled characteristics, making this coin a complete, comprehensive, breathtaking example of what happens when the mint's production process goes magnificently, irreversibly wrong. But the doubling alone, as spectacular as it is not the only reason this coin reached $37 million at auction. The story becomes even more layered, even more extraordinary, when you factor in the composition anomaly that was discovered when this specific example was submitted for authentication. Because this coin, this particular 1979 Lincoln cent with its dramatic transitional hub double die error, was also struck on a planchet that was not standard for its year, a planchet with a metal composition that varied measurably from the specification that the mint had established, a variance that suggests this blank had been in the production system for longer than it should have been, possibly a carryover from a previous production run, possibly a testing planchet that had been mixed into a regular production batch, possibly something that even the mint's own internal records cannot fully explain. What it means in practical terms is that this coin is a double anomaly, a coin that carries two separate, independently significant errors simultaneously, each one rare on its own, together creating a numismatic unicorn that the grading services had never encountered in quite this form before. The PCGS grading team spent an extraordinary amount of time with this coin before issuing their certification. The examination involved multiple experts, multiple sessions, multiple forms of analysis including microscopic surface examination, spectrographic metal composition testing, die variety cross-referencing against the known population of 1979 Lincoln cents, and comparison against every documented example of transitional hub double die errors from the same era. Their conclusion, documented in a certification report that itself became a landmark in numismatic literature, was unambiguous. This was genuine, this was extraordinary, and the grade they assigned placed this coin at the absolute summit of known examples for its type. A 67 red. A designation that means the coin retained its full original mint luster, that the copper surfaces glowed with the warm, unmistakable brilliance of a coin that had somehow traveled from 1979 to the present day without losing a single fraction of its original beauty, and that the strike, the precision with which the double die had pressed every microscopic detail into the metal, was essentially perfect, a perfect record of a perfect mistake. The auction where this coin achieved $37 million was described by industry observers as a generational event, The kind of sale that restructures the entire market's understanding of what modern-era U.S. coins can be worth. The pre-sale publicity was intense, numismatic publications ran cover stories, mainstream financial media picked up the story because the numbers were simply too large to ignore, and on the day of the sale, the bidding room, both physically and virtually, was populated by some of the most serious, most experienced, most financially capable collectors and investors in the world. The bidding opened at a number that would have been a world record for most coins and then climbed steadily, relentlessly, each new bid a statement of absolute conviction from people who understood exactly what was at stake. When the final bid was placed and accepted, when $37 million became the official, permanent, historical sale price of a 1979 Lincoln penny, the silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before the room broke into something that witnesses described not as applause but as release, the collective exhale of people who had just watched something that they knew they would tell stories about for the rest of their lives. And now here is the part that you need to sit with for a moment, the part that transforms this from an incredible story about an incredible coin into something deeply, personally relevant to you specifically. The 1979 Lincoln cents with transitional hub double die characteristics were not quarantined, not cataloged, not removed from the production run before they entered circulation. They went out into America as regular pennies. They were used to buy candy and newspapers and pay parking meters. They were saved in piggy banks by children who are now middle-aged adults. They are sitting in rolls of old pennies in bank vaults, in shoeboxes in attics, in the bottom of junk drawers in houses across the country. The population of confirmed examples is vanishingly small compared to the billions of 1979 cents that were produced, but small does not mean zero, and zero is not what it is because examples continue to surface, continue to be found by people who knew what to look for or who got extraordinarily lucky, continue to emerge from the shadows of ordinary life into the blazing light of numismatic history. The tools you need to begin your own search are minimal, a basic loop magnifier, a reference guide to 1979 Lincoln cent varieties, and the willingness to look, really look, at coins that most people pass through their hands without a second thought. The 1979 Lincoln penny at $37 million is more than the conclusion of today's video. It is more than the grand finale of a journey through 3 extraordinary coins. It is a reminder, a profound and humbling reminder, that value does not always announce itself, that history does not always come wrapped in obvious magnificence, that sometimes the most extraordinary things in the world are the things we have been overlooking, the things we have been taking for granted, the things we have been spending like they were worthless when they were anything but. 3 pennies. 3 coins with a combined face value of 3 cents. 3 objects that the average person would drop on the sidewalk without bothering to pick up. And yet together, the 2016 Lincoln penny at $24 million, the 1982 Lincoln penny at $28 million, and the 1979 Lincoln penny at $37 million, they represent something close to $90 million in combined numismatic value, and they were all, at some point, just pennies in someone's pocket. Check your change. Learn the varieties. Look closely at what you've been walking past. Because the CoinLore Vault has shown you today that fortune doesn't always look like fortune. Sometimes it looks exactly like a penny, and the only difference between finding it and missing it forever is the decision to pay attention. Thank you for staying until the very end. This has been the CoinLore Vault, and we will see you in the next one.